preach to are the guards that he's chained to and the guards that he is going to be chained to for a long time. So, let me flip the script a little bit before we get to it. What are some crazy things that have happened to you in the last year that you weren't expecting? Anything happened because you weren't expecting it? Does that make sense? What are some good things that happened because of the things that you weren't expecting? Like, what were some good things because of the storm? Because of the storm, I realized, you know what? We need a team at Thomasville Road that is ready to go out with the storm. I don't have the manpower on staff to do anymore. I need to create a team. So that's a little plug. I'm like, get ready. I'm going to call some of y'all to be on a team. But for example, my son is now in Boston. I've gone to Boston twice. Never been to Boston, and I've been there now twice to help my son out. I've gotten, because the guy didn't show up and because Steve left me high and dry, I get to preach a lot more. And I don't know if you know this, I like to talk, so I get to preach a lot more. And I've enjoyed getting to set my direction on what I think is good for the church and where to go for the church. So good things have happened. So back to Paul. Despite being in prison, not being where he wanted to be, and not preaching to who he wanted, Paul preaches some of his best sermons ever in Rome. And some of y'all are going, preach in Rome? Yes, he preached to those colleagues. He preached to the people that were around him. He doesn't get to preach to the guards, but he doesn't get to preach to the crowd, but he preaches to these royal guards, the Praetorian guards. And just so you know, these are the same guards that have access to Caesar. These are the same guards that stood next to Caesar. Like one day they might be chained to Paul, but then the next day they might actually be guarding Caesar. They were in the same room with Caesar. They were in Caesar's home. So they had some influence, some connection with Caesar. So, the church in Philippi has sent this letter to Rome. They want to know how Paul is doing. They're sure that he is miserable because of the circumstances he's in. They think he might even be dead. So he writes this letter and says, hey, you know what? Everything is great. I'm having a lot of joy. So we pick it up in Philippians 1, and we're starting in verse 12. It says, I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel. Y'all got that? He's in prison, and he has thinking to himself, what is going on has happened to serve the gospel. What has happened to me has served to advance the gospel. So Paul is completely aware of God's sovereignty. He knows he is where God has put him. Even though he's in chains, he's where God has put him. So verse 13. So that it has been known throughout the whole imperial guard to all the rest that my imprisonment is for Christ. And most of the brothers, having become confident in the Lord by my imprisonment, are much more bold to speak the word without fear. Some indeed preach Christ from envy and rivalry, but others from good will. The latter do it out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, but thinking to afflict me in my imprisonment. What then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and in that I rejoice. Yes, I will rejoice. For I know that through your prayers and the help of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, this will turn out for my deliverance, as it is my eager expectation and hope that I will not be ashamed, but that with my full coverage now, as always, Christ will be honored in my body, whether by life or by death. Wow. So back to verse 12. This is the first point. Paul has confidence in that he is where he's supposed to do instead of complaining about what's going on. It says, I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel. When you think of progress, a lot of images come to mind. My social studies mind goes back to,
the progress across the country, the Pilgrims, not Pilgrims Progress, but like the frontier, the people that left the East Coast and put everything they owned in a covered wagon and just headed out. They progressed forward. They were going out to explore new territories. They were going out into places unknown, and they were taming this new land. The Greek word for progress is prokope, and it means to move out. So they are moving out. So instead of complaining about his circumstances, instead of trying to get people to feel sorry for his situation, he tries to get the Philippians to be more confident in their witness of the gospel, to move out. He's trying to embolden them. He's saying, if I can do this, if I can be where I'm at in chains, then you need to have confidence wherever you are to go and do what it is you're doing. Don't you hate it when people do that? You're having a miserable time. You want to wallow in your misery. You want to no, I like being right here, just upset. And everybody's like, you're awesome, go. And you're like, you want to slap them across the face. Anyways, the truth that comes out is what you really don't want to, what you really want is not to do what it is you know you're supposed to be doing. Complaining and making excuses is a heck of a lot easier to do than to go and be witnesses for Christ. It's a lot easier to say, man, I'd rather just sit here and complain about the people that I'm working with or complain about the situation that I'm in. They'll let somebody else go preach Jesus. So, how do you get to a place in your life where what we perceive as obstacles are actually opportunities? An old theologian said this, in the infinite wisdom of the Lord of all the earth, each event falls with the exact precision into its proper place in the unfolding of his eternal plan. Every event is planned precisely at the right time, at the right place, for the right reason, the right circumstances, so that the gospel will be advanced. We can sit here and complain about the circumstances of last week, a storm blowing through, and we were without power, and oh, it's so great. Let me just complain about not having any power, and la 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 la. Meanwhile, there's people that are down east of us that don't have any power. And Susie was just telling me they prevented 2 suicides, and they shared the gospel with like 100 people down there working with disaster relief. I'm not saying God caused the hurricane, but every event takes place to advance the gospel. Wow. So the question is, when you face difficulties, can you see how God is going to use those circumstances to advance the gospel? When we get in circumstances that we first respond to, like I'm going to complain about this or I'm going to be upset about this, do you look for the reason why God is doing that, and is there an opportunity to share the gospel? And even if you can't see that opportunity, are you confident that God is advancing the gospel through the circumstance that you're in? And then how does that make you move forward? So verse 13, it says, so that it has been, I think I've got that in here. So that it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard and to all the rest that my imprisonment is for Christ. The word imprisonment comes from the Greek word meaning bound in chains. So he wasn't in a prison like we think. He's under house arrest, but he is in chains. Elsewhere, Paul says that I am an ambassador in chains. Just so you know, Paul was probably shackled with chains that were probably only 18 inches long. So his wrists are shackled, his ankles are shackled, and then those are chained together. So he's probably like this, and then those are chained to guards. They're not going to let Paul go. So Paul is chained 18 inches away from imperial guards. Like I did this during COVID. Like, you want to talk about social distancing. Like, there's no social distancing there. All sorts of images come like, what happens if you got to do this? Or like, yeah, okay, never mind. All right, so despite Paul, he doesn't see himself as a prisoner for Rome. Matter of fact, later on we're going to see that he actually calls himself a prisoner for Christ. So he doesn't see himself chained by the Romans. He doesn't see himself as a prisoner to Rome. He sees himself as a chained to God. He sees himself chained for the cause of Christ. So what does that mean? How does being in chains help Christ? So the next big thing was he's chained for a purpose. What's the purpose? Paul's imprisonment has reached Philippi. Think about that. If you just go, okay, yeah, the people in Philippi wrote a letter to the Roman government saying, how's Paul? But that means they had to hear that Paul was in prison. And they didn't have Gmail back then. They didn't have the Pony Express back then. It got delivered hand to hand, foot to foot, and they had to cross 600 miles, including the Adriatic, was it the Adriatic or the Aegean? One of those, they had a big sea. They had to go around a big sea. You know, like there's a lot of stuff there. So he's chained for a purpose, because now what's happened is his imprisonment has reached Philippi, touched everybody in between Philippi and Rome, and it has emboldened those people to do what they're supposed to do. So the question is then, what are the chains that you look at and you go to yourself, these chains are restricting me. These chains are making it hard for me to do what I'm doing. Like, is it your computer at work? For Courtney, it's me coming into her office all the time and, yeah, bugging her like, I need you to do this, I need you to do that. It's restricting her. No, I'm just kidding. But we think of ourselves like, oh, I can't go out and spread the gospel because I'm chained to this computer at work. I can't go out and spread the gospel because I'm chained to this cubicle in my office space. I can't do this because I'm tied to a schedule. I'm tied to a situation. We go, I can't do what I'm supposed to be doing because of the chains I'm in. But what Paul saw was the chains are there for a purpose. Do you understand what the purpose is that you are supposed to be sharing the gospel? How do you see that the situation that you are in is an opportunity? How do you look at every situation where you're in as a chance to share Jesus? Because I want to say this, you're not where you're at by accident. There are no happy accidents. There are no accidents going. Whatever situation you're in, whatever you're bound by, whatever is the problem, you're there for a reason. You're chained for a purpose. So we saw confidence instead of complaining. We see that chained for a purpose. I think this happens especially like when a hurricane goes through. Like, how often do we say, well, what can I do? How do I make a difference? I'm just one person. Is there anything? I can't do anything. I'm just one person. And so what happens is a lot of us don't do anything because we think, well, what's the point? I'm only one person. How can I do that? Especially when you get into these situations where you are chained and all that stuff. Have you ever met somebody that was like, you could tell they loved Jesus, but they were on fire for Jesus? Like, we had a girl that went through the college ministry. Oh my gosh, she just got married. Love her to death. But this girl, like, if I picture Jesus, she's what Jesus looked like. She was just on fire for Jesus. She was just, it didn't matter what was going on, it was all about Jesus. So much to the point where you're like, Alexis, you need to stop because you're freaking me out a little bit. You know, it's like, it's too much. But she's like, no, it's not. It's like, I'm going. We got to go. We got to go for Jesus. Everything for Jesus. And out front, when I'm talking to her, I would tell her, like, man, you are crazy. But inside, I kind of envied that because I want to be on fire like that for Christ. Why am I not like that? But she just took every opportunity to be for Jesus. So how do you measure? That being said, she has no idea of the impact that she has on people's lives. She's just living for Jesus. She has no idea. So how do you measure? Going back, so we get to this place where I can't do anything. I'm just one little person, so I can't make a difference. But we don't understand the impact that every little thing that we do does. So how do you keep that in your mind? How do you keep that in your mind that everything that you're doing causes an impact? What I'm getting at is we need to be passionate no matter who or think or what we think we are impacting, because it makes a difference. Look at verse 14. It says, "And most of the brothers, having become confident in the Lord by my imprisonment, are much more bold to speak the word without fear." Who are the brothers? Well, this is Paul. This is Paul. He's in prison. All right? We forget that there were already probably little congregations of churches already forming in Rome. So the brothers are those other people that are in Rome preaching, because they see him in prison. They see him being emboldened by being in chains. So they're emboldened. They want to go out and preach more. But also these brothers are the guards that are, think about it. You got a guy that likes to sing while he's in prison. You got a guy that's like on fire for Jesus. And when he's chained 18 inches from you, you're going to go, what is your deal, dude? Like, what are you doing? Like, why? And he gets to share the gospel. So even though he's in chains in prison, he keeps doing what he's supposed to do, and it emboldens those around him. Let me just put it to you this way. Think about the big names in Christianity. Like, wherever, whatever, I've got my big names that I follow and all that stuff down the line. None of them started off as Christians. Does that make sense? None of them were born Christians. Somebody, somewhere along the line, shared Christ with them. And then might have gone on and driven the milk truck or gone on and done whatever, not realizing the impact that they made on that person. And so I read a book this week where a guy, he was talking, he said one day this guy and this guy showed up at a house, and they asked if they could come in and share something, and these two people let them in, and they shared the gospel of Christ. And meanwhile, there's a little boy playing on the floor, playing with his wooden trucks. He says this is back in the 40s or 50s, playing with his trucks. They think the kid's not paying attention, but the kid was paying attention, and the kid accepted Christ. And then that kid became the grandfather of this preacher who wrote the book. He's like, if those two guys hadn't gone out of their way to stop at this house, they didn't know why they stopped at the house. There was no reason for them to stop at that house. They just felt like, let's just stop at this house. Knock on the door. Hey, can we share Jesus? Sure, come on in. And next thing you know, you got people writing books. So we need to be confident without complaining. We need to be we need to realize we're chained for a purpose, and then we need to do what it is that we do. And then when we do that, we realize that there is conflict as well. So verse 15. Some indeed preach Christ from envy and rivalry, but others from goodwill. The latter do it out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, but thinking to afflict me in my imprisonment. What then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and in that I rejoice, yes, I will rejoice. So we are to rejoice. Let me just put it this way. What is your reputation? And how valuable is your reputation to you? Let's go another direction. What is envy? I looked up some definitions. Envy is a feeling of discontented or resentfulness, longing aroused by someone else's possessions or their qualities or their luck. Or it is the desire to have a quality, possession, or other desirable attributes belonging to someone else. I looked it up we get these big, go to seminary, you have to buy these big fat Bible dictionaries. So I actually used my Bible dictionary today. This is what it says. Envy is the sin of jealousy over the blessings and achievements of others, especially the spiritual enjoyment and advancement of the kingdom of Christ freely and graciously bestowed upon the people of God. Wow. When I'm envious, I am envious of other people's blessings and what has been bestowed upon them by God. Wow. So where does envy come from? It's produced by learning about the advantage of someone else instead of you. When you find out somebody else got this or somebody else did this, we go, ugh. Someone else is getting something that you think you deserve. There is a fear with envy that your reputation or who you are is not going to measure up to the person that's receiving the praise and all that stuff. There's a saying that when envy moves in, love moves out. So basically you are trading your love for people, your joy for people with envy because they're getting something that you think you deserve. What are the consequences of envy? What I would say is, when I am envious, there is no way for me to have joy. No way for me. And then the thing is, what my envy does and what my jealousy does, it tries to rob the person I'm envious of their joy. Does that make sense? If you've got something that I want, I'm going to do whatever I can to take your joy away that was given to you by Christ. So what's going on in Rome during that verse that others are starting to preach, and some of them are doing things that are good, some of them are being envious. What's going on is some of those preachers in those other house churches, those other congregations, some of them are trying to spread the gospel in Rome, and then here comes Paul. Paul comes in, and not only is he preaching the gospel, but he's preaching the gospel chained to guards in a house, and he's being more effective than they are. So out of envy and out of jealousy, they're going, well, that just means I got to go out and do it more. So they're going out in jealousy and spreading the gospel more. And Paul's like, who cares? Like, if they're going out spreading Christ because they're upset of what's happening with me and the gospel of Christ is getting spread, then all the more. So he rejoices in that. He's like, that's great because the gospel is being spread. So, are you rejoicing because the gospel is being proclaimed? Like when you look around the crazy world, but here's the way I phrase this in this. We look at the crazy world that we're in, and we go, this is crazy. And like I said, we get into these places where we go, I am chained for a purpose. I do what I do. I get all this stuff, but the world is crazy. I can't make a difference. I can't do anything, and so on, so I don't try. But what God is doing is he's creating opportunities for us to share the gospel. And we see, it seems there's a correlation. It seems the more and more the world gets crazy, the more and more we see awesome things that God is doing. Yes, do we have whatever the population of the United States, is the population of Christianity shrinking? Absolutely. But we see great things that God is doing because people are truly coming to Christ. So, last part of that is the sovereignty of God. Verse 19, the way he does this, he says, for I know. So he's able to experience the joy because he says, for I know that through your prayers and the help of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, this will turn out for my deliverance. As it is my eager expectation and hope that I will not be at all ashamed, but that with full courage now, as always, Christ will be honored in my body, whether that be life or by death. Paul says he knows. He is saying, I am certain. I know for a fact that whatever happens to me right this moment, me chained to these guards, living in a house in Rome, whatever happens, it will be for my deliverance. It will be for the glory of God. It will be the best thing ever. Why doesn't he fear death? He's facing execution. Why doesn't he fear that? Because he knows whatever happens, it is best for him. He understands the sovereignty of God. So, all that to say, that leads into our next passage. Before I get there, let me... y'all remember, I asked you kind of questions last week. Do y'all remember Aaron Ralston? Sure you do, right? Yeah. He's that guy that went hiking in Utah and slid off the rock down into the crevice, got his arm caught, and then after 6 days he had to cut his arm off. And just so you know, after he cut his arm off, he rappelled 60 feet down the cliff, and then he hiked for 8 miles until he found help. I got one better. Do you remember Bill Jaracki? No? In 1993, he went fishing and got his leg caught under a boulder, and he could see the storm moving in with snow and all that stuff, and he didn't have his jacket with him. He didn't have his backpack with him. He didn't have anything with him to get in touch with anybody else. So he took his flannel shirt, used it as a tourniquet, cut his leg off, used the fishing clamp, this is like crazy, used the fishing clamps to clamp off the arteries, and then crawled to his truck and drove to the hospital. What? That is crazy. What do they have in common? There is a will to live. They had a will to live. They wanted to live. They went to great lengths to live. Think about that. What do we do to go to great lengths to live? We spend a lot of money on the best doctors around. I wake up every morning and go, okay, I'm going to go walking today. Anyways, we spend money on gym memberships. We try to eat healthy, and it's all because we want to live. All right, some people literally cut off their body parts to live, to survive. 9/11 is next week, and I don't know why. It's a little morbid, but we see all of those people that started jumping out of those buildings from 70 stories up because there was a chance that they might live instead of burning to death. What I'm telling you is we have a instinct, we have a desire, we want to live. All right? Why? Here's the real question is, what are you living for? What do you live for? This is a short life. You don't know how long you got, so what are you living for? I put some things up here. Let me just say, you guys fill in the blank. I put some stuff down here. So for me, living is, some people would say money. Some people might say pleasure or power or beauty or entertainment. There's another one down there. I think it's not up there, but I have education. All right? These are things that people live for. So if that's what you're living for, then what is dying? Does that make sense? So if I'm living for money, that means I am dying. That means when I die, I am broke. If I'm living for pleasure, that means dying is no more pleasure. If I'm living for power, that means dying is powerless. If I'm living for beauty, dying is decay and rot. If I'm living for entertainment, dying is having no more fun. All right? And if I'm living for education, now dying is I've got nowhere to tell people how smart I am. Because that's what I like to do. All that to say is what we're living for has a correlation to what you will die for. Does that make sense? Whatever it is you're living for, whatever you put in that blank, I am living because of this, I'm living because of my family, then what does that mean you're dying for? You got it? This is how we make idols. This is the idol making. Whatever it is you're living for, whatever it is you are striving for in your living, that becomes your idol because that is what you die for as well. They become idols. We want to live a life that matters, so we turn to these things that we say we want to live for. If I'm living to make money, that's how I'm going to make money. But when I die, guess what? I'm broke. If I'm living for my family, when I die, I don't have my family anymore. They become idols. There's a quote, "No one is ready to live until they are truly ready to die." Here's my thought. You have to know, you have to be aware that the end of your life is certain before you will joyfully risk to live the way you are to live. You have to know that you are going to die before you can truly live the way you are supposed to live. Yes? So we have Paul. He's in prison. He's chained to guards. The Philippians want to send him a gift. They write to him. They're like, this is how it's going. Paul writes back, and this is, we pick up verse 18. He says, "What then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and in that I rejoice. Yes, I will rejoice. For I know that through your prayers and the help of the Spirit, Jesus Christ, this will turn out for my deliverance. As it is my eager expectation and hope that I will not be ashamed, but that with full courage now as always Christ will be honored in my body, whether by life or by death. For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain." So what does it mean to live? What did we just talk about? Paul's talking about rejoice, rejoice, rejoice. Our trust and our faith in the sovereignty of God helps us to realize that these chains that we're in are for a purpose. So what does all of that mean? What does that deliverance that he talks about mean? This is one of those coffee cup verses. For me to live is to die. For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. I think this might be my favorite verse. We went to Senegal one year, and I don't know why, but I ended up talking to these orphan kids, and I said something about to live as Christ, to die as gain. And one of the little kids, they speak French, and he's like, "Ooh, ooh, ooh." And the lady translated, she goes, "They just learned that verse." And I'm like, "Okay, let me hear it." And they all went, "Philippians 1:21." And I'm like, okay. And then they did it all in French, and I recorded it. It's like so cool. I was just like, that is cool. Anyways, if you go up to the college area, when you walk out the door, it says, "To live is Christ." This is a big deal. This is what keeps me going. So what does it mean to live? Let's look at what Paul means by life or death. Paul makes one of the most dramatic statements maybe in all of the Bible. It's the heartbeat of his life. He is like, to live is Christ, to die is gain. All right? To live is Christ, to die is gain. That is a huge, huge statement. All right, our English translation doesn't really do it justice, all right? There's no verb in the Greek, so it basically just says to live Christ. All right, it's a lot more emphatic. There's a lot more punch to it. Do you get it? Paul is living for Christ. So you can throw a lot of verbs in there if you wanted to. You could throw to live means Christ, to live depends on Christ, to live honors Christ. All those verbs work because there is no verb. It's like pow. Whatever you want to throw in there for a verb works. All right? So what do we see is that living for Christ is not referring to just coming to church on Sunday. It is not just, I keep saying it, making a mean 3-bean salad. It is living for Christ. It's not referring to a life with Christ on the weekends. All right? Let's go back. Think about it. Paul is waiting trial. He's under house arrest. He's chained to guard. And his single-minded devotion is to Christ. He's living in a little room, chained 18 inches from somebody, and the only thing that is consuming him is Christ. Everything he is bound up in Christ. The only thing that he desires is for Christ to be glorified. So what does it mean to be a Christian? It means that you are living for Christ. Everything else becomes secondary. I want you to think about that. If you call yourself a Christian, everything else in life is secondary because as a Christian, we are to live for Christ. That is number one. Nothing else centers, nothing else matters, nothing else is a big deal. Look at Galatians 2:20, right? I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. Just Christ. So, is Christ the most single focus in your life? If not, then why? So we're going to come back to that. So, let's go on to the next part of that phrase. All right, the next part is, what does it mean to die? Just like in the first part, there is no verb. So this is to die, gain. So what does gain mean? It means to obtain or secure something desirable, favorable, profitable, an increase in wealth or in resources. So Paul is saying death is gain. And this is where everybody goes, what? What is your view on death? I said it on Sunday. It's like we don't even like to talk about the word death. Like we don't even like the word death. But Paul is saying it is gain to die. So what is your view on death? However you view death, that is how you view life. So, how are you influenced by culture's perspective on death? How does your view of death influence your life? So why does Paul say to die is gain? He says that it is more profitable, it is more favorable than life. How does one get to a place where you view death as far better? So, little sidetrack here. Hopefully this will put it in view. If you don't believe in Christ or heaven, then what is death? It's just the end. Yeah, it's just if you do believe in heaven, but you think it sounds boring because we were going to fly around with harps and la la la, sit on clouds, then what is death? What is death? And why are you living for that? Like, is that what you're living for? if that is what your picture of death means, then what is your life? This is why people don't fall into all of that stuff. I got to be careful about these next two because I don't want to make anybody mad. There's a wrong view of heaven among Christians, and it doesn't come from bad teaching, it just comes from improper teaching. If you view heaven as one day you're going to go to this mansion with lots of room and the streets are paved with gold and there's pearly gates and mansions, like I said, with lots of room, what is your definition of death, and what is it that you're living for right now? What is life? You know what I'm saying? If your life is that one day I'm going to have a mansion and I'm going to have golden streets, that's how you're going to live your life. Here's the one I was going to say that I hear this all the time, and it's not wrong, and it is great, but it's not the purpose. If your view of heaven is that one day you will get to be reunited with all your loved ones, then what you're living for right now is just to be with your loved ones, and you can't wait to get back with them. All right? I'm going to give you an example, and I tell this to people, and hopefully it shocks you, but it doesn't shock you. I am 100% confident in my wife's faith in Jesus Christ. Hopefully she is for me. One day we're both going to die. That is a certainty. That is a 100% guarantee. And because of our relationship with Christ, we are going to be reunited in heaven. And everybody's like, isn't that going to be awesome? You're going to be reunited. I'm like, I don't care about her in heaven. When I get to heaven, she is not going to be my... I'm going to be with God. I'm going to be with Christ. I'm going to be able to sit there and bask in the glory of God. And that's going to be, get out of my way. You're getting in the shadows. Like, get out of the way. Like, I want to be with Jesus. You know, it's like, so it's going to be awesome that I get to spend eternity with my wife, but I'm going to be more focused on Jesus. And when that's the main focus, when my getting to spend time, getting to be in the bask in the glory of God, if that's what I'm focused on, if that's what I'm doing, then death becomes so much better, and I'm living for that. And while I'm here, he has blessed me with a wife and kids, and I am thankful for that. But he's still got to be my main thing. The greatest gain will be to stand before and behold Christ in all his glory. That has to be the greatest gain. If we're living for the glory of God, then we are brought into the presence of the glory of God when we die, and then we're like, well done, good and faithful servant. The cool thing is, we know that this will happen. Another theologian said this: what greater encouragement can a man have to fight against the enemy that when he is sure of victory before he fights? I know what's going to happen. It doesn't matter what happens to me because I know one day I'm going to bask in the glory of God. Wow. I live for the glory of God because I know, I have confidence that one day I will experience that glory. I'm not worried about the streets of gold. I'm not worried about the mansion that has lots of rooms. I'm not worried about spending eternity with my kids or my grandkids or the people that I've never met. I know I'm going to get to spend time with Jesus, and that's got to be the most important thing. So I hope I'm making that clear. Paul can face death because he is assured of his deliverance. He is assured of what is next, and that is to be with Jesus. So, 22. If I am to live in the flesh, that means fruitful labor for me, yet which I shall choose I cannot tell. I am hard pressed between the two. My desire is to depart and be with Christ, for that is far better. But to remain in the flesh is more necessary on your account. Convinced of this, I know that I will remain and continue with you all for your progress and joy in the faith. so that in me you may have ample cause to glory in Christ Jesus because of my coming to you again. So Paul is between a rock and a hard place. He is pressed. He says he's pressed on both sides. He's stuck between, to live as Christ, and I'll do that because that's what I'm supposed to do, but I'd much rather be with Jesus. So he's stuck in these two places. He says, it's my desire to be with God, and it's very much better for me, but I will stay here. It's a struggle between what he wants and what is best for the Philippians. So here's the even though. Are you living a life that even though you want this and it is the best thing for you, are you willing to be here where God has you doing what you need to do? Does that make sense? To live as Christ. I want to be with Jesus. I want to go where he is. I want to bask in his glory. But right this moment, he has me standing in this fellowship hall talking to y'all about joy. And I'm like, why are you doing that? I want to be with you. And he's like, no, for this moment, this is where I want you. And so then Paul says something that sounds a little arrogant. He says, because this is for your betterment. So I'm not saying that I'm better or whatever, but anytime the word of God is preached, anytime he is spoken about, this is better for you, it's better for me. And so right now, this is what we will do because this is what God has called us to do. There is a time that'll change, but for right now, I've got to, this is what I'm getting to is, this is how I get through the moments. This is how I get people, how are you, like, you've got all of these hats that you're wearing and doing, I'm like, my job today is to live for Christ. My job today is to be obedient in where he has put me, and that's what I'm going to do. And it is better for you that I am doing that. And I don't mean that arrogantly. It's just for some reason he has got me right here doing this for this moment for everybody that I come in contact. I'd rather be with him because some of y'all are paying, you know what, I'm just kidding. But I'd rather be with him, but for right now, I am okay to be where I'm at. So there's some areas that we need to think about this. Like, where are things that it is better for you in the moment to be there? And obviously, our first thing is we think of, we got family. It is better for me that I am here because my family needs me, and so on and so on. So I'm going to live for Christ for my family. Or we could say, I'm going to live for Christ with my friends. It is better. I'm going to live for Christ for my church. All of those are great things. But those are the easy things. What about I'm going to live for Christ with that guard that I'm chained to 18 inches away? I'm going to live for Christ with my coworker that drives me crazy. I'm going to live for Christ in these areas that I don't want to be in. We got to remember, God puts you there for a reason. So our heartbeat has to be to live is Christ and to die is gain. Jesus is the only one worth living for. So every day, the purpose of life is living for Christ. When we live for Christ, then what happens is we realize the purpose that he's put us, where he's put us, and that means we are living for others, and we put others first, and then that comes to the last part of this, which is the great commandment. I always like to tell it out of Mark because there's more to it. It says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength." I say this all the time. That is living for Christ. All your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. If you are doing that, you don't have time to do anything else. That requires all of me all the time. But what happens is, because I'm doing that, now I'm able to love my neighbor as myself. I'm able to love wherever I'm at, my coworker, the pain in the neck guy next to me in the checkout line or whatever. I'm not complaining. I'm not doing all that stuff because I'm living for Christ with everything that I am, and the result is that I love my neighbor. So, you got 2 minutes. Questions? Wow, I did a lot of talking that time. All right, let me pray. Lord Father, we just pray, Lord, that we learn to live for you. Lord, that we learn to live, that living is for Christ, that we put you first in everything that we do, that we understand the circumstances we are in, we understand where we are at. You have done all of that for a purpose, and that is to advance your gospel. So, Lord, we just praise you. We lift your name on high. You are worthy of our praise. Lord, we want to be with you, but we understand that right now to live is Christ. We pray all this in your Son's precious name, Jesus Christ. Amen. All right, go forth. Live for Christ. What time do they finish? You know, end of the year thing, not convocation, but invocation or whatever that is. At the last minute decided